Gentlemen, we're very happy to welcome here tonight Professor Barry Brook from the City University of New York. Many of us here know him already very well, but for those of you who haven't met him, perhaps I should just say something about him. He's a graduate of the City College of New York, Columbia University and the Sorbonne, and is currently director of the PhD program in music in the City University of New York. He was a recipient of the Dent Medal for Musicology, awarded by the International Musicological Society. He's a Chevalier des Arts et des Lettres, awarded by the French government, and has held Guggenheim, Fulbright and Ford Foundation fellowships. He's been a visiting professor at New York University, the Eastman School of Music and the Sorbonne. He's the author of some 5 books and perhaps some 50 articles, and he's president of the most important Répertoire International de la Littérature Musicale Commission, and also of the Musical Iconographical Commission. Having given that resume of Professor Brook's academic status, perhaps I'd like to just add that we have been singularly fortunate in the Department of Music to have had Professor Brook with us. I think he's been with us here now some 4 weeks. And the many students whom he's unstintingly given his time to, as well as his colleagues, appreciate very much the fact that he's been here and has given us so much during so short a time. Professor Brook.
Ladies and gentlemen, an anniversary of whatever temporal dimension is a time for looking both backward and forward. It is appropriate on such occasions to assess achievements, to plan changes, to indulge in nostalgia, and to pronounce proud platitudes. It would be presumptuous of me as a visitor amongst you for the first time, and all too briefly, to discourse upon an anniversary as important as the centenary of this distinguished university. It would be easier to talk as an expert if I remained here for no more than 3 days, or if I were a certain American singer of popular songs. I will speak about another anniversary, one that I do know something about. And I'm not referring to the scheduled 1976 bicentennial celebrating American independence from England. On that subject, I will say only that unless my country's dire political clouds are not soon dispelled, I would recommend that our bicentennial be postponed until after the next presidential election. Or that we forget about it entirely and simply rejoin the British Commonwealth. The anniversary I will describe concerns my 10-year involvement with computers in musical documentation, a liaison which, like many marriages, was begun with an excess of optimism and an insufficiency of funds. It suffered an indescribable series of delays and frustrations, but it managed to survive its 7-year itch, and fortunately its 5, 6, 8, 9, and 10-year itches as well. It has finally, after a decade, stabilized itself as a realistic working partnership. I dare not burden you with the history of the trials and frustrations of this marriage. The present state of some of its offspring is my topic, more specifically, computer applications to musical sources, to literature about music, and to visual depictions about music. That would include bibliography, indexing, thematic cataloging, and photo-composed printing. I will not be dealing with the other principal areas where the computer may serve music, as in composition, in pedagogy, and for analytical purposes in sound analysis, style analysis, and structural analysis. 10 years ago, at scholarly meetings in both New York and Dijon, I read a paper with, I thought then, the rather dramatic title, Music Documentation of the Future. I should like to quote some passages from its introductory paragraphs. Documentation, as a general term, has been defined as a group of techniques necessary for the ordered presentation, organization, and communication of recorded specialized knowledge in order to give maximum accessibility and utility to the information contained. The documentation crisis in virtually all disciplines is well known. It will grow worse. It has been demonstrated that the number of scholarly periodicals doubles roughly every 15 years and increases tenfold every 50 years. It has been shown that 80 to 90% of all scientists that have ever been alive are alive today. Furthermore, a given subject with a dozen qualified scholars today may have hundreds or thousands in 50 years. Unless something is done about it, keeping abreast of one's discipline, even one's little corner in the discipline, will become an increasingly impossible task, and search time and search fatigue, with their resultant inefficiency, will multiply exponentially. This challenge is being met head-on with the aid of the computer in many branches of science, in business, and in government. There have been many impressive steps in the last few years, especially in medicine and the natural sciences. Remember, I'm still quoting from an article that's 10 years old. Current experimentation with optical scanners, supermicrophotography, photocomposed printout, and consoles with television-type screens communicating with central computer memories provide tantalizing and realistic promise of future developments. In this brave new computerized world, the scholar will be able to sit in front of a screen in his office or in his private study, pushing buttons with one hand and holding a gin and tonic with the other. His special typewriter enables him to hold conversations with a computer many miles away. And note-taking is hardly necessary, since any page passing before him on the screen can immediately be reproduced in paper form or be recalled at will at any time. We may even dare dream of that famous little black box in which the entire contents of the Library of Congress or the Bibliothèque Nationale, or both, are stored in speedily recallable form. Whatever the future may hold, let us beware of naive speculation. The present already contains many valuable techniques that we musicians and humanists must learn to utilize. Unfortunately, I'm still quoting, the humanities seem to be sinking rather than swimming in their uncharted sea of documentation. It must be made very clear that automation offers no immediate pie in the bibliographical sky. Every forward step in the field of information storage and retrieval has been hard fought and extremely costly of time and funds. I never really believed it at that time when I first wrote about it. I've learned better. Furthermore, one cannot speak of the computer and documentation in the same breath without realizing the implied dangers. Having a computer, a colleague of mine once said, is no substitute for having an idea. Information and knowledge are not the same thing. a genuine contribution to knowledge can be made with only a minuscule amount of information, but a third-rate intelligence is not likely to produce anything significant with even an ocean full of computerized paper. The article continued with a description of the wonders, the great speed, the exaggerated speed of the monstrous machine, and it gave details of available bibliographical and analytical techniques and of projects then underway or in the planning stage. It concluded as follows: bold proposals are in order, and I should like to make a few. First, we need a working meeting of those who have developed input languages for musical notation. Information retrieval may be interdisciplinary, but music has a special problem. Its language is made up of symbols other than conventional numbers and letters. That problem, one of coding, we will have to solve on our own. Secondly, I would like to suggest that no major bibliographical study be undertaken in music or music literature without serious thought being given to the possibility of getting help from the computer. There are many kinds of projects that cry for this processing. There are many kinds that don't. That's an aside. Finally, I propose that we investigate the possibility of establishing an abstract journal of significant musicological literature published throughout the world, a sort of RISM for music literature. The journal could be worked on cooperatively in many countries and by various universities that do graduate work in musicology. Abstracts would be stored in a computer, indexed and published, and retrieved in various ways on demand. During the past 10 years, I'm now back to today, obviously, through the efforts of many in the field of music documentation, some of these proposals have been implemented with varying degrees of success, as were several projects derived from them, and many, many more that were developed independently. In every instance, the stumbling blocks were huge, and the time involved invariably 5 times or 10 times as long as anticipated. Nonetheless, taken together, these projects are impressive. They might even cause a rebirth of optimism. They bring us within sight of a world music documentation system, WMDS, a grandiose, impractical, internationally coordinated scheme for the collection, processing, retrieval, and dissemination of useful information about all branches of music. I hasten to add that this fiendish system does not exist, nor am I proposing that one be established. I'm already responsible for proposing too many projects, and I always end up being asked to try and make them work. The visionary WMDS, it has an impossible acronym and therefore could hardly work anyway. The visionary WMDS can serve, however, as a map, a grid for the establishment of future specific projects in music, to fill in the gaps, as it were, and to coordinate national and international activities. It can also serve as a model for similar systems in the other arts and humanities. The nucleus for such a model already exists in the group of projects and commissions currently operating with and mostly without computer assistance. These projects have been sponsored internationally by the International Association of Music Libraries, the International Musicological Society and have enjoyed the support of the International Music Council of UNESCO and numerous other national and international bodies. They include RISM, the International Repertory of Musical Sources, that dates back to '52. RILM, the International Repertoire of Music Literature. RIDIM, the International Repertoire of the Iconography of Music. Répertoire International d'Iconographie Musicale, RIDIM. It includes the Polyglot Dictionary of Musical Terms, in which 7 languages have been included. This very valuable project is now reaching fruition, and the dictionary itself is in press in Hungary. Needless to say, one of the languages is Hungarian. It includes the Directory of Music Research Libraries. It includes an international center for musical or musicological works in progress, a very valuable organism that prevents duplication of effort. This is regularly published and is handled by computer. It includes special commissions from public libraries, music school libraries, research libraries, broadcast libraries, and for cataloging and classification. It is associated or includes the International Association of Sound Archives, and of special importance for contemporary music. It involves the music information centers, which are in existence in some 30 or 40 countries throughout the world. The function of these music information centers is to gather scores, recordings, and information about contemporary composers and their works, and make them available to performers, conductors, all throughout the world. These projects all have one essential ingredient in common, and that is effective international cooperative effort. That, I found, is far more important than any assistance from automated monsters. In a few moments, I shall describe 3 of the projects I've just listed, illustrating their computer implications and something of their potential for other disciplines. First, however, I must add what I believe to be the ever essential cautionary word. Again, areas like composition analysis and pedagogy, where music has also worked with computers, have all had and continue to have knotty problems in harnessing the computer to accomplish their goals. It has generally been accepted, however, that in the field of documentation, including bibliography and library operations, the computer has by now succeeded in solving all real problems of software development and of cost reduction. Unfortunately, this is true only in theory and in the mouths of computer company sales representatives. Some documentation problems have been solved, some of the time, for some projects. Let me illustrate this from the library world by quoting from a devastating diatribe against computers that appeared as recently as 1971. It was written by a distinguished librarian, then of Hofstra University in New York State, who was on a Council of Library Resources fellowship to study computer applications within 10 major libraries. His name was Ellsworth Mason, and the title of his piece was "The Great Gas Bubble Pricked by a Gentleman of Quality." He says, among many other things, "My observations convinced me that the high costs of computerization make it unfeasible for library operations and that it will become increasingly expensive in the future. When we used the computer, it didn't save staff, it didn't speed processing, and it cost a great deal more to do the same things we were doing by hand. Our reaction was to computerize more, although we lost money on every operation we computerized. The computer is a half-baked machine. Every other kind of equipment we use is bought for specific purposes to perform defined tasks at a known cost. Even highly automated equipment like the MTST comes with a simple program to perform known tasks after a modicum of training. A wholly baked computer, nicely browned, would be ordered to specifications and would come ready to dust off to insert the program provided by the manufacturer to do what we wanted to be done and to begin our computerized operations. Only under such circumstances would we consider any other machine, but we have been brainwashed not to apply the same reasonable standards to the computer. The Cobra has us hypnotized. When it is dumped on your dock, it can do nothing for you. Like Ford delivers you a Continental automobile and deposits it in your yard. You leap with joy and shout to your neighbors who come to admire. You puff with pride, as we do for computers. Let's go for a ride, they say. Somewhat sheepishly, you explain that this is the new proto-electric Framestats type of Continental, with a wonderful fume-free motor, but there is no battery known strong enough to power it. When they say, "Why did you buy it?" do you reply, "Oh, I'll do my own research and development to produce the battery"? Such an answer would be insane. But this is exactly what we do for computers. We assume the responsibility, the elaborate costs, and the human agonies involved in programming to make the machine do what we know we wanted it to do before we bought it. In one project now underway, it will take a staff of 10, 3 years to make anything happen. Libraries really are getting important when they can launch amateur research and development operations, which is what programming really consists of. Then he gives a series of truths under the title, The Revelation. The first truth: come to the computer, all ye who are heavily laden, and it will make everything effortless. The facts: the computer has involved librarians in greater and more prolonged agonies than anything in recent history short of the Florentine flood. The second truth: thou shalt do everything with the speed of light if thou butst computerize. The facts: response time of computers, which is indeed incredibly fast, as fast as movement of an electron, is not to be confused with the response time of computerized processes. Getting the stuff in, getting the stuff out, correcting it. There's that old adage about computer languages that I'm sure many of you may have heard, but it's so old maybe some of you, the younger of you, may have forgotten. You know about Fortran and 17 other languages, but the most favorite language of mine is called Gigot. Garbage in, garbage out. The third truth: the computer will save you money. The facts: computer experts laughed. No one claimed to have saved any money doing anything by computer. The fourth truth: he goes on to detail each of these allegations. I'm reading only the beginning. Well, anyway, once you've done it, thou shalt have economies in future programming by having programs convertible to later generation computers. The facts, absolutely false. The fifth truth, well, anyway, once someone has done it, programs can be converted from location to location, so you save the expense of programming for yourself. The facts. This initially is one of the most appealing lures of the computer industry. All the library computerators I questioned agree that transferability of programs is completely unfeasible at present and in the future. He has 4, 5, or 6 other truths equally venomous. When I first read Mr. Ellsworth's diatribe in 1971, I was prepared to kiss him on both cheeks. My own marriage with the computer had reached a low ebb. It was the time of the 7-year itch. I was ripe for divorce, and Ellsworth had enumerated, I thought then, all the valid grounds. I was in such a state of disaffection with my IBM 360 that I could easily have offered marriage instead to Mr. Ellsworth. I don't quite know how the 360 computer felt about all this. Even though I kicked it often enough in fury, it always continued to blink its silly lights quite unperturbedly. Mr. Ellsworth was guilty of overstatement. It was a case of too much and too late. His all-out attack has been effectively rebutted both by his own colleagues in professional library journals and more pointedly by the success of some recent library automation projects. However, the many grains of truth that accompany his karate chops must always be kept in mind in all computer liaisons, especially before entering into them. That my personal relationship with the infernal engine has improved is obvious from my presence on this platform and from the fact that Rilm, Rism, and Redeem are alive and well in Paris, Kassel, and New York. I'd like to describe briefly now each of these projects. Realm Abstracts is an international journal that is produced almost entirely by computer, indexed by human plus computer combination, and photo-composed by a computer-driven photo composition machine. It has taken us 10 years, and we've just about reached the point when we can say we are in control of all of the mechanical problems in the production of this journal. Just very quickly, this is what the cover looks like. The A is on the back of the cover. It was designed from the original abstract form, which you may be able to read a bit that way, by a very gifted New Zealand student then studying at my university. I have copies of a journal here for any of you who wish to see what it looks like in real life. The journal operates through a series of international, I should say national committees in some 45 countries. You may see there the Australian National Committee, of which Donald Peart of the University of Sydney is chairman, and you may recognize a few familiar names if you can read it. Can you all see it pretty well? I think that's better. Can you read it way back there? Good. I might mention that these slides are all courtesy of the South Australia Institute of Technology. The various committees gather abstracts via abstract forms such as this one, which contains all of the usual bibliographical information. This happens to be the German version. It appears in 6 different languages, including Russian. This indicates the absence of about 4 inches of space, which enables one to write an abstract of some 150 words. You'll notice that included are books, articles, dissertations, both doctoral and masters, the masters selectively. It includes reviews, it includes a great deal of specific information about the nature of the publication, whether it has illustrations, facsimiles, thematic catalogs, what have you. These control boxes at the top are the places where the editors indicate classification and arrow references, which I'll describe in a moment. The classification system was devised after a long period of testing and consultation. It covers the entire field of music literature, including related disciplines, other arts, pedagogy, everything you can possibly think of. An example of the abstracts, this is highly enlarged obviously, in the field of Australia and Oceania, under the general rubric of ethnomusicology, which is actually incorrect. Shows you one that deals with Aboriginal music in Australia, one Samoan music, and another with basic anthropological questions. The arrow reference is one to an iconographical volume. You can tell that from the fact that this is an RB, which means a review of a book, and 10, which may not be too legible, which means that it's in the category of iconographies. This carefully constructed abstract number is a powerful container of information, particularly in the index. If you look up someone's name in the index, some author, you can tell the kind of item he has written, whether it be a book that would be a BM, book or monograph, or a doctoral dissertation as this one is, DD, or an article in a periodical, or in this case a review of a book. Now the reason this is an arrow reference, even though it is Oceania, is that it is primarily a book of iconography. But in preparing the abstract form for input, the editor mentioned in this point that it should also be listed as an arrow reference under Australia and Oceania, so that for perusal purposes within the journal it appears in 2 places, sometimes more. Then comes indexing, which I believe is one of the very special features of this journal. The indexing is done in quite extensive depth. And it is done with a number of interesting helps from hardware. The index editor takes an abstract. This is one about Beethoven, although Beethoven's name doesn't appear here. I'll explain why in a moment. A piano sonata in F minor, a sketch that appears in Moscow. Now, in order to facilitate keyboarding, the person that inputs this material uses a list of terms under dictionary lookup. 6 refers to Beethoven Ludwig van, and when the operator presses the 6 in a certain mode, the input device will spill out Beethoven, Ludwig van. Eventually that Beethoven will automatically be put in capital letters. The 78 refers to autographs, and here again that is done automatically. 61 refers to creative process. 7 to Beethoven. You see, we didn't want to put in this instance his entire name, so we have 6 Beethoven Ludwig van and 7 Beethoven, and we can have various combinations, Mozart and Beethoven, leaving out first initials, or Beethoven L van if you like. So you do have a certain amount of speeding up of the keyboarding. If you have someone like Tchaikovsky Peter Ilyich with many different accents, you can avoid many mistakes by this kind of thing. We've taken long terms and complex terms and common terms for this list. Now, this string, and there may be as many as 15, although usually it comes out to 4, 5, 6, 7, is transferred into a computer printout which reads Beethoven, autographs, and then the string you saw, and automatically the number is added. The number appears with all strings automatically. It only has to be keyboarded once. Here's an example of the index in its final photo-composed form. This has gone through several reproductive processes, so it's not quite as clean as it might be. But you can see that by the use of different type fonts, we achieve different messages. Bold faces for subjects, capitals for authors. Now, let's turn to the second project. I might add first perhaps that the Realm Abstract Journal has been in operation now for 7 years. That is, it has produced abstract journals for 7 years. The seventh year is beginning now, and it seems to be working from the point of view of both subscriptions, which are mounting steadily, if all too slowly, and coverage, which is becoming more and more complete all the time. In addition, there are Realm retrospectives that take different aspects and go back beyond the initial date of Realm, which was 1967. This covers only current literature. These include French dissertations. All of them are annotated, similar to this with abstracts. It includes thematic catalogs in music, and eventually the iconographical bibliography of music. Second project is RISM. Most of you know about RISM, the International Repertoire of Musical Sources. It was started about 23 years ago by the international societies that sponsor both RISM and RILM, and with one or two others, READIM as well. Its objective is to provide worldwide bibliographical control of musical sources. It includes bibliographies and catalogs of early music, of theoretical writings on music, of anthologies of music. Its most important effort has only recently begun to appear. That is the big alphabetical list by composers of works in libraries all over the world. That's called the Rhythm Series A. What is appearing thus far is printed music, and the printed volumes will be finished in about 5 years. That means that you should be able to look up under any composer and find all of his printed works that are available in libraries and all of the locations in which they may be found. You can see what an important help to research this might be. It includes every obscure composer that is found in every of the participating libraries, and virtually all major countries and libraries are participating, with, I regret to say, the exception of a few, including Australia. That will be remedied, I believe, in the near future, since the Australian Musicological Commission, under the chairmanship of Dr. McCready, will be meeting at Perth, and one of its tasks will be to establish an Australian Rhythm Committee to report on the holdings that belong in the Rhythm Project. These are all holdings of early music, printed in manuscript of whatever kind, that appeared prior to about 1800. Now, the second part of the A series, A2, will be the manuscripts of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Here the problem becomes very grave, because there are so many of them that there is ample room for confusion. If a composer will write a number of pieces in the same key and for the same number of instruments, how can you distinguish between a trio in F that is mentioned as being present by Telemann in Stockholm and a trio in F for the same instrumentation that is present in Bratislava, since the title and composer are identical? The only way to do so, and Telemann wrote dozens of trios in F, as did many other composers with many other genres, the only way to do so is by using the musical incipit, the first 10 or 12 notes. That is sufficient in virtually all instances to positively identify a work of music. There is no symphony of Haydn that cannot be identified positively by its first dozen notes. Now, in order to do so with the help of the computer, since you're dealing with vast numbers of manuscripts in the 7 figures, there are probably more than 1 million manuscripts from the 3 centuries I mentioned that exist in European libraries alone. How does one compare them? How does one identify anonymous ones? How does one determine which of the composers to which the same pieces seem to be ascribed is the real one? Doubtful parentage in this period is quite common. We all know that Haydn wrote not 107 symphonies, but 307, 200 of which bear his name but are not actually his. By the way, that's a new figure in case you didn't know it. In order to make musical notation machine readable, you have to take the pitches and the durations and other information and translate them into numbers and letters which the computer can deal with. There are a number of codes that have been established to do that. One is the Ford Columbia, which is very popular. The other, which is better, called the Plain and Easy. It's better not only because I and a student invented it, but because it's simpler and more human. The slide isn't terribly good, but this line of letters and numbers is sufficient to convey every bit of information that's conveyed in that line of music. You can see that if that were in machine readable form, you can ask the computer to alphabetize that list of letters. You simply extract, or have the computer extract the letters and alphabetize it, much as Barlow and Morgenstern did. If you add the pitches, you have the most positive identification possible. It's a relatively simple procedure with letters used for pitches, commas and apostrophes used for octave level, and numbers used for duration. You can see the octave levels described here, and then there are a number of special abbreviations to handle other things. With this single set of symbols, one can encode all incipits. The idea is that rhythm is planning now for the eventual publication of gigantic bibliographies of manuscript holdings. In order to do so, you need bibliographical control. For that, in this instance, a computer will be of great help. There has been, I'd like to try this one, see if it's any clearer. No. It was given to me in two ways. Which is clearer? Can you tell me? This one or this one? This one. Good, thank you. The Plain and Easy code has been used in a pilot project in Denmark, cataloging an important series of, wait a minute, of manuscripts covering all vital information. Now, if this were done in the libraries of the world, this material could immediately be brought together and all kinds of special lists could be made. Here, for example, is a symphony by Franz Beck. This means Denmark Königliche Bibliothek. And it's his 23rd symphony, or that's the title, Symphony 23 by Signor Bach. It's a manuscript copy of such and such a date. This is the size, this tells you the parts, tells you the tempi, and here you have the incipit given in the Plain and Easy code. This tells you everything you need to know about the identification of that piece. This tells you some bibliographical data relating to the library call numbers. This is all you need to be able to bring first all of the works of Beck, or bearing the name of Beck, together, and then all of the symphonies with this incipit together. There are all kinds of other tricks that could be done, such as comparing works by eliminating grace notes, which are also included, or comparing works based on the first appearance of each pitch of a measure. Now, this goes further because once the material is inserted in the computer, it can also be printed out using musical notation. This can be done rather rudimentarily, as I will indicate in a moment, or rather elegantly with more sophisticated equipment now being tested. The means for outputting musical symbols is by using either a plotter. A plotter is a device that has a drum and a bar, and the drum moves and the bar holding a pen moves, and the combination of moves produces all kinds of slanted and straight lines. Now, the programming is done in advance for the various symbols, and then when this is reduced, it really looks quite like an F clef and two dots, which get blurred. Here is an example of this same business done with a Bach Kyrie. This looks rather inelegant at the moment, but I assure you that it's on the way, or it is already much better. This also shows the possibility of automatic transposition. The Kyrie in the original key has been automatically transposed a half step up. This can be done in every direction, and it can be done without including the accidentals in the body of the machine. This was done hastily in order to prove the point. But the accidentals could actually be placed at the beginning, as a key signature, as we usually use it. This means that for those of you who are busily preparing scores from 18th century parts, you can encode the scores and automatically get the parts printed out. It's here, although not quite operational as yet. So keep working. Here's an example of early notation done in the same way. And here's an example of the same Giuffai Kyrie translated into conventional notation. This has not been translated automatically, but indeed it can be. There's a great project in France that translates lute tablatures automatically from the original notation into conventional notation. And it has already done a great deal. Now, the RISM project is at present, of course, a well-developed project not using the computer. For the A2 series, the manuscripts, it would be foolhardy if it doesn't. What I've shown you here are a series of tests that are now being made in order to determine the feasibility of using this process for the manuscripts. The third project I will describe is Redeem. And this is truly a maniacal one. It's maniacal because if RISM deals with, say, 1 million manuscripts, Redeem deals with 1 billion. It is supposed to deal with, or at least be capable of dealing with, all visual depictions of musical subjects, portraits, instruments, band concerts, engravings of concert halls, oil paintings, book illustrations. Now, the first objective of that project, which is quite young, it's about 3 years old, was to establish a cataloging system. And that was done after a great deal of effort with the help of many distinguished art historians, musicologists, iconographers, and so on. This tells you all you want to know, sometimes perhaps more than you want to know, about a work of art that contains some musical information. The reproduction here is not as clear as it might be, but it tells you the name of the artist, and in this case it's engraving, the engraver, and this is the person who drew it. It tells you where, or it tells you the title, which is a mistranslation of the title you can read down here. The location, the Gemeente Museum in The Hague, and the medium, engraving, the size, the source of the photo, the number of performers, non-performers, the number of instruments, whether there is music notation, and if there is, whether it's legible or not. Here the performers and instruments are described in careful detail. This performer is a man playing a violin. The violin has a long neck, no pegs are visible, and a convex bow. All of this information, by the way, can eventually and has been computerized so that you can look for all long neck, no peg violins with a convex bow and bring them all together for study. It's not as easy as all that, but that's the principle. There's a man playing a lute with 2 times 9 strings and 11 pegs and so on, a cornet, and one man who sings. Here, the pictorial category, the setting, the occasion for music, and other iconographical information is given. And there is an elaborate set of instructions, possibilities, for example, in order to order the things and control it, sometimes with numbers. The medium, if you can't tell the medium from an, that's possible, it's indeterminate, if it's a painting and so on, and that way you can bring various media together. And instructions as to how size should be given, and every one of the different, quote, parameters, unquote, of the form is given in a multi-page set of instructions. Now the value of putting it together this way is that the material can be compared, and there has been now a test of the computerability of this. I don't even remember what these symbols are, but they all refer to different elements on that cataloging card. I unfortunately don't have the exact thing. This is based on a project in early music, and it tells you the artist or the attribution of the artist. It tells you where it is. It tells you the title. It's a painting. The source is the Index of Christian Art in Princeton. It has a quartet of angels, and the instruments are given, and so on. And here you have the material on the bottom. This iconographical analysis is something that art historians have very rarely done to the works that they study. Art historians study their art for not the subject content, but for technique, for relationship, for all kinds of painterly questions. They rarely are concerned with subject matter, except in perhaps certain areas of Christian art and one or two other special problems. That is why the art historians are quite interested in this project, because we have provided a method whereby all of the content of a painting or an engraving can be indexed, and ultimately with the computer retrieved. If you go, by the way, to any museum and say, I would like to see all the engravings that you have that have a picture of a stag or a monkey playing a flute, they will not be able to find anything of the sort. They do not index or catalog subject matter. And this is, of course, essential for the kind of research that will and has already ensued from this project. Now, in order to publish this material when it is put together, we've been playing with things called microfiche, which takes a bunch of, it's heating up, a bunch of these things and puts them together in a little piece of film that can be made quite easily and sold quite inexpensively. There are already 2 large editions of such collections, and the possibility of very many more. Here's an enlargement of that microfiche, which is hardly more legible, and here's an enlargement of one of the things which makes everything terribly ugly. I can't even tell what instrument she's playing. It's better when it's small. And just very, very quickly, the center for this project, at least temporarily, is in my university, and we have something called the Research Center for Musical Iconography. It has a large number of files and special collections and checklists that makes it possible for scholars to get a large number of facts, gain a lot of information. It's really at the beginning of what eventually should be a very large operation. Now, it's long past time when conclusions are in order. What do these various developments signify? For musical scholarship, for musical education, for the humanities in general. Such efforts, among others of course, are not merely the ordinary improvements in bibliographical controls that come with time and the arrival on the scene of additional scholarly practitioners. They represent potentially, and to a degree actually, a higher order of magnitude in the flow of information. When combined with the new techniques of reproduction, Xerox, microfilm, microfiche, such efforts are changing the nature and dimensions of modern research. Broadly based, systematically organized, deeply indexed, computer-assisted documentation systems are as important in the humanities today as they have been in medicine and the natural sciences, where they have been in existence for many decades. Such efforts, and many more to come, free individual scholars from the kinds of time-consuming search chores that can be accomplished infinitely more completely and efficiently in terms of total human labor by international cooperating teams working, if possible, with computers. Such efforts can help men and women to explore other disciplines via selected, abstracted, or critical bibliographies, and thereafter confront their own discipline with new types of research techniques. Such efforts should assist men and women to devote more of their time and intellect to truly humanistic, educational, and scholarly activities. Thank you.
Risen and Realm are well known to many of us, and it is rather like the private life story of two dearly loved friends to hear that one. But the rhythm in particular, the iconographical sources made me decide I'd put aside a certain project I had in mind for a few years till it's published. But well, thank you very much. I'm sure Professor Brook would be pleased to answer any questions if anyone has them. It's been so well documented. Oh, yes. Professor Brook.
Professor Brook, a lot of what you say about the opportunities for researchers is rather tantalizing, because although
I'm sorry, but I didn't hear.
A lot of what you say about the opportunities for researchers is rather tantalizing. Although the range of material available for scholars is obviously increasing all the time, so is the cost of getting access to it. You did say something about the enormous costs earlier in your talk, but I think you could have said perhaps more about this, because it costs a tremendous amount, as you know, to have access to computer time, and various organisations that are supplying material that has been computerised are obviously going to have to charge a lot for it. And this unfortunately means that The only sorts of scholars who can really take very much advantage of this are scholars supported by the funds of large institutions, people on all sorts of research grants and so on. And this doesn't leave very much room for the odd freelance scholar who just likes to go off to some foreign library and search out this stuff for himself with a pencil and paper. It means that ultimately humanities research is going to be entirely in the hands of people supported by big universities. Would you agree with that?
I agree with the first part of it, but not with some of the rest of it. The costs are indeed high, but the rewards are even higher. And I do believe that the costs are slowly, all too slowly, coming down. I believe further that we have no choice. We must use this monster if we're going to achieve any breadth of control of existing materials. I believe eventually there will have to be increased government support, as there is in those disciplines that are thought to be essential. Physics. If you have to make a Sputnik, you're going to get control of your discipline. If you're concerned with human lives, they build an index medicus, which is a masterful example of the control of medical information. It's much more difficult for the humanities because the people with the money don't provide it. But I would like to say specifically about realm abstracts, which has been supported very extensively for much of its existence. It has now reached the point when within a year or two it should be self-sufficient, and it looks that it will survive on that basis. Now, it does get a certain amount of support from the university. The university gives it free computer time, but we've given the university a great deal too, because we've given the university an extraordinary means and a certain amount of hardware that they can use to print other things, to print manuals, to print bulletins. This very system, which I perhaps might have described a little more fully had there been more time, is a very inexpensive and yet highly sophisticated means of producing elegant books and journals. It uses the least expensive hardware possible. That was part of our original plan, to develop a method that the other humanities could use, and for that reason we were sponsored by the American Council of Learned Societies. We use teletype machines for input. We have a specially programmed cathode ray tube that displays everything back to us in the final form. That is, all the accents are there, all the font changes are there, so that we can very quickly correct things, add things, subtract things. And this programming is really quite sophisticated. It's probably the best of its kind for that kind of device. It takes half an abstract and can insert 2 or 3 lines, and everything spools down. You can make all kinds of individual corrections. You can have the lines go in every which way, insert things and subtract things, so that the work can be done efficiently with less human labor, because it is so effective, more quickly because you don't have to send things back and forth to printers. Everything is done in-house until the final 9-track tape is prepared and then sent to a photo composition commercial house, which can produce the camera-ready pages in the proverbial minute and a half, or 120 pages or something like that. So the costs have at last come down. It's only been in the last couple of years, last year as a matter of fact, that we are able to say that the costs are down to human dimensions. Until then, given all the research and development costs and the headaches and the delays, it was far more expensive than if we had been doing it all by hand. So being a native and naive optimist, I do have some hope that the grave difficulties, of course, will be somewhat controlled. I have read some of the literature from the sciences which seem to be appalling as far as cost is concerned and dimension and what have you. On the other hand, in music, which is a relatively small discipline, it seems to be possible to do the job. Yes, sir.
I don't recall, Professor Brook, that you identified the discipline from which Ellsworth came, but he might just as well have been a physicist if he wasn't, in fact, because all of the quotations that you read from him are things that have been said in other contexts as well. There are two things on which I'd like to comment. One is a comment which perhaps doesn't invite any reply from you, and that is that probably already clear from what you said, and that is that the computer people can now do things on the computer which they would not otherwise have attempted. Things that do require the consumption of a very large amount of man-hours, which would not otherwise have been possible. And the other thing is, do you find that your students become seduced by the computer and insist on using the computer for things which they could very well do much more simply without it?
I find that some students are seduced by the computer, but not mine. We have a number of computer projects that are going at our university, and none of them are anywhere near as woolly-headed as any of mine were at their instigation. They're usually carefully controlled, narrow projects that involve programming largely already present. Now, we do have one very creative programming type who has a strong musical background, who's being given his head. But by and large, when someone comes and says, I'd like to do this with computer, just a few figures will show that it will take him 3.5 years, if he's lucky, to get it done with a computer, and 3.5 weeks if he does it by hand, you know, if it requires a lot of special programming, plus the headaches. But that is not to say, as you indicated, that the computer can put you in another dimension for research purposes. And as far as physicists are concerned, many of them today can't do without it. They treat it not as humanists do, as a toy or something that they have to get into because it's the thing to do, but they treat it simply as an essential tool. I'm sure you know that better than I. How about some wine and cheese?
Well, thank you very much, Professor Brook. I was, if I just be permitted a final remark, to take up that point of seduction which Professor Prescott raised. I was hoping when you showed those slides of transposition and transcription that it wouldn't seduce us into abandoning those essential tools of music therapy. Well, thank you very much.